We'll fuck all the dice, bring worlds to life. Masters of the dungeon cutting like a knife. Heroes, villains, lord, share. Learn the craft, magic in the air.
Welcome to Masters of the Dungeon, the podcast where game masters get deeply nerdy about running tabletop RPGs. My name is Nacho, and joining me this week is Gadget. He is an author. Hey man, I was going to do a little pre-ramble about you. He is an author, a member of Modern Escapism Podcast, and also the mastermind behind Do Dragons Dream of Scorched Sheep, a long-running actual play D&D podcast that has now taken its players and listeners on an incredible journey for over 60 episodes.
Hello.
Hey, man.
How are we doing, Nacho?
Yeah, good, mate. Yourself?
Yeah, marvellous. I mean, in that post-Christmas, I don't know what day of the week it is kind of vibe, where I'm 62% cheese and the rest is beer.
Yeah, where pants are irrelevant.
Yeah. Only leave the house to walk the dog and buy more beer.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm the same. It's just it's like the Olympics for the microwave because everything is just heated up leftovers.
Yeah, pretty much. Turkey curry for everybody.
Yeah, I think Boxing Day is like the day that your microwave was born to. It's its biggest day of the year. So before we get into it, just tell everyone a little bit about Do Dragons Dream of Scorched Sheep.
So, Scorched Sheep, as it's affectionately shortened down to, that started in 2021. Modern Escapism started first as a kind of a pandemic podcast, deliberately trying to not talk about the news or the pandemic and stuff like that. So, all the while we were doing it as kind of like, I'm bored at home, I'm in lockdown, I can't go anywhere, because the British lockdowns were quite long running compared to the rest of the world. Yeah, maybe not you guys. No,
I think we were the instigators of the lockdown. We set the way over here.
Yeah, you were the first and the last.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'd always wanted to play D&D, but like never had the friend group to do it. Like I got into music as a teenager. All of my friends were into playing music in weird shapes or form. But D&D something that always interested me, but I could never really get into it. And I got to a point with Modern Escapism, like, let's do a special. Like, what on what? Says, let's do a D&D special. I'll buy the books, I'll learn how to play it, and we'll screw around and see what comes out of it. And we did this two-parter called Under Grasswell Manor, which was the stupid, incoherent dungeon that I put together, which was just a series of boss fights with like players who were like level 10 or something like that, and I threw them at a Minotaur, then I threw them at a Chimera, then I threw them at a war band of goblins and a Drider, and then a Lich at the end. Like it was stupid. But we all had a really fun time playing it. We all got really drunk, and on the recording, we recorded for like 4 hours. I did not know how long it took to play D&D. I expected that would be a 2-hour recording. But we had loved it so much that we decided, maybe we could do like a second pod. And we got into it, and that's when we brought in Candy. Candy wasn't originally part of it. We brought her in. She'd done the character art for Grasswell Manor, and she'd always wanted to learn to play it. And she's a good friend of mine. I thought, let's get her involved as well, because a girl one will help. It turns out she was no help whatsoever, but none of them were. But we ended up having this really stupid campaign.
She just became the token cat lady / alcoholic of the group.
Yes, there's always one. We started this campaign really inexperienced. Like literally, I'd done this one shot, and then we were into recording an actual play campaign. We got everything wrong. So many comments on YouTube and on like our Discord going, "You got this real wrong. You got this real wrong. Doesn't work like that." That kind of thing. It took us like halfway into the campaign to realize that as a warlock levels up, they get more casts of Eldritch Blast, stuff like it's really stupid, inane stuff like that. But it just became about the fun and the storytelling for us rather than the rules. And we created this campaign that people loved, and like people keep coming back for it. People shout at me when we're having like a scheduling conflict and we don't get an episode out for a couple of months. So yeah, it just started off as this kind of little pandemic experiment that
Yeah.
consumed a huge chunk of my life over the last 3 years. And I love it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not complaining. I absolutely adore it.
Yeah, yeah, that's what was good about your podcast for me is it starts off with both you and the players learning the game at the same time,
Yeah.
and you can tell that you're mates and you're having fun, and there's cheeky banter going on. It really does actually. So a lot of these actual plays do feel like they are performances, whereas yours actually is quite, friends getting together and playing a game and learning the game together, and it's fun. And you can see that developed. I don't know about your players. I know that even up to episode 60, they're still asking things like, "How does advantage work again?" or "What dice do I use?"
Yeah, I think most of what foxes them is just D&D Beyond and just like navigating
Yeah.
the character sheet, even though we've done it for 3 years.
Yeah.
But they got into the role play of it surprisingly quickly, and really effectively. Especially Biggie, who plays Monk Calbo. I threw some weird shit at him, some out of the left kind of random nonsense, and he never questioned it. He never says, "No, I'm not doing that." He just rolls with it, and not a pun. He just goes with it, and I just think, bloody hell, mate, what can I do that will actually get you to tell me to stop? He just keeps going. It's hysterical. Like the situations I can put him into. It's unreal.
It's because he's stoned all the time.
The character is, not the player.
Yeah.
I got him to fall in love with a ship. I mean, for God's sakes.
Yeah. So, I guess so it follows the adventures of Stigvild, who's a Goliath barbarian.
Yes, Goliath Barbarian.
Treble O'Cleef, who's so Stigvild's played by Stig.
Yeah.
Treble O'Cleef, played by Oodles, who is a halfling bard slash
halfling bard, yeah.
sorcerer. Did he become multi-class?
Yeah, he multi-classed about 2/3 of the way through. So he's kind of like a sorcerer bard or whatever you call it. Yeah, that was because he was finding it really. He didn't have much utility in fights because bards are support characters essentially in a fight. And there's only so many. I don't think he ever cast bardic inspiration throughout the entire campaign. But yeah, it's just like there's not really much they can do in combat that is like direct damage. So he wanted like some spells. He wanted some nukes. So yeah, I let him multi-class.
Yeah, he was kind of, I guess, the de facto leader of the group. I know he provided a lot of. He did lean in the bard thing by providing a lot of the music for your campaign as well. A lot of original songs.
He wrote a lot of the lyrics. I did all of the music because my God.
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm giving him too much credit
on that one.
Yeah. And then we've got Calbo Greymerkin, played by Biggie, who was a Dragonborn monk who didn't seem to. He was probably had the biggest learning curve. Every time it was his turn.
He also built a monk with like very low decks. So it kind of hampered everything they did. Hang on, what was where's my D&D beyond? Because I've got his character sheet on there.
When he was like when he kept saying his armors class, I was like, how I've got level 3 characters that are got like almost like twice as much armor class as you. How have you got such low armor class?
Hang on, where's my campaigns? I'm fairly sure he only had something like 12 decks by the end, which is ridiculous for a monk because obviously they're all based around dexterity.
Yeah.
By the end he'd got to +2 on dexterity.
Oh.
But he still only had an armor class of 12. He gave himself +3 charisma. He had 16 in charisma, which makes no sense for.
He should have been the bard.
He should have been a bard.
Yeah. And then we got Capri Smitty, who was played by Candy. Was she Tiefling?
Yeah, Tiefling
Warlock. Yeah.
With an
and her patron was a cat.
Yeah, Archfey patron was kind of how we did it for the rules. But yeah, it was her shape-shifting cat, who was an elder god that used to live inside of a dragon.
Yeah,
because why not?
I don't know if we want to get into spoilers for your campaign because people might want to check it out, but it's going to be
True.
hard to not talk about it and not get into spoilers.
It's
And
fine.
there's 60 episodes anyway, so I'm sure
Yeah.
by the time someone gets up to that episode, they would have forgotten
I mean,
this conversation.
it's nearly 120 hours of content. It'll take them a while to get through.
Yeah.
Plus all of our little side specials and in between season things.
All right, so before we get started, I do have a little sort of segment that I call Game Master Backstory, where we will dive into your ideals, bonds, and flaws of being a Game Master.
Okay.
Okay, so your ideal. Is there a core philosophy that shapes how you approach being a Game Master?
Yeah, the players are there to have fun. I want my players to have fun. I want to have fun. We're playing a game, ultimately. With it's organized make believe. But my main thing is to remove barriers that stop the players having fun. So, if I do something and the players don't like it, on the fly, I tend to try and change it, or try and make it into a situation where they can succeed. I try not to railroad them. I want them to be able to do what they want. Unless I've put them in a dungeon and I need them to go in a certain place. It's like, yeah, you're going down this direction. But, in general speaking, like overworld stuff or kind of roleplay stuff, I tend not to force them down a path. I will put stuff in front of them. It's up to them whether they engage with it or not. Sometimes to my annoyance, if they don't engage with it, I've got reams of stuff that players have ignored in all the campaigns I've done.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the story, I write the story, but the story isn't mine; it's theirs. I'm creating. I feel like for me, I'm creating the roadblocks in the story for them. I'm creating the antagonists. I'm creating the danger. I'm creating the things the things they have to overcome. But it's their story, and it's for them to define how they get through that, and how they work through whatever obstacle I put in their place. So I try not to prescribe too many things. I also just remove some of the non-fun rules, like encumbrance. No, we're not doing that. Ammunition, I tend not to track unless there's a really good reason for it. Like we're prepping for campaign 2 at the minute, and then they're going to get more rules. They are going to have to deal with more stuff because they know how to play the game now. But I've said to them, I'm not tracking ammunition unless you get a legendary weapon. If it's a legendary weapon, I'm not giving you unlimited shots on that on some kind of +3 bow or something like that. That one you track ammunition for, but your base level common as much short bow or long bow, unlimited ammo. Because who cares about that? That's not a fun thing for them to have to manage that.
No.
That's just an annoying box ticking exercise for most people.
It's a vibe. It depends on what type of game you're running. Like if you are like running a sort of a survival type game, then it makes sense to track ammunition, lighting, food. But if you're just having a good time, no.
I did a one shot with one of my offline groups to try out the Fallout RPG, and we didn't end up vibing with it. We didn't enjoy it that much. But for that, I did track ammunition because that's a wasteland survival thing. Tracking ammunition in Alien RPG. That's a survival thing. You can't have infinite ammo in that. But for your kind of bog standard fantasy tabletop RPG where it's the power fantasy kind of thing, and you're not doing an explicit survival thing, then I don't track ammunition. Unless, unless there's a very good reason to.
I'm similar. I don't sort of like track, but I do have rules. I don't track encumbrance or ammunition. But then, for example, in Dragon Heist, if you at the end of that game the players find 500,000 of gold, so you're not going to be able to just put that in your bag of holding. So that's going to require a few trips and a bit of planning. So where it logically makes sense for the game, then that's when you call it. But
The other thing is about just being willing to bend the rules for the sake of fun.
Yes,
I'm a big believer in the rule of cool. And if they want to do something that the rules don't cover, or because it's a podcast as well, and because we do it for an audience, if it's something funny, I'm going to let them do it, and I'm just going to work out on the fly how to do it.
Yes.
And this comes from my influences because I got into D&D when I was listening to Critical Role, but the problem I have with Critical Role is they're all wonderful people and it's wonderful stories that they write, but it's very by the book. And it depends whatever book that Matt Mercer's writing at the time, because like I know the Tal'Darai stuff has now moved on from D&D. It's kind of their own thing now, but it's very rules heavy. Whereas I also listen to Dimension 20, and Brennan Lee Mulligan knows the rules. The man's an encyclopedia on the rules, but he's more willing to bend them for something silly or something weird. And that's how I like to be as a DM. I tend to play my games from an area of make it fun and funny, because it's a silly game. It's a very silly game, and it's a silly thing we're all doing. And that's what I love about it. So, yeah, my kind of ideal is to, like, they should be having fun. If they want to come up with some cockamamie scheme to get something done in a way that I haven't accounted for, let's work out some rules to see if they can do it. But if they fail those rules, the consequences will be worse.
Because we have a similar vibe. Because I have the advantage of listening to your game, so I know my games. Our DM style is very similar in terms of tone and rules are cool. I make things up because players will always hit you with things that you're not. The book doesn't tell you how to do it, or you don't know. Like there was one the other day in my game where they came across a room that was slightly ajar, and there's 3 ghouls in there. And they're like, close the door. And then the question is, can ghouls open the door? I don't know. That's not in the monster manual. So, so my thing is, okay, what's the intelligence of a ghoul? Well, let's say a DC, opening a door is probably a DC 5. I'll just roll an intelligence check on that. And no, they can't figure out how to open a door. Or if they pass, they do,
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
it's not a rule. That's just something... That's just something I had to pull out my ass to keep the game moving and
Or if you want to be kind of slightly cruel to them, you can have it so that they close the door and they walk away. You make them roll a stealth check. If they fail that, the ghouls hear them and they bash down the door. But they get the party get like 2 turns to react to something because they're hitting the door and smashing at it. So it's like that's how
but
you
that
can
also
bend the rules to make it work in that situation.
It also became a pacing issue because they just come from 2 long combats as well, and I didn't want to roll into a third combat, to be honest. I felt like we needed to have a change of pace. So there was also a rule there to just go, okay, it's not making the encounter go away, but it's kind of just moving the game along. So we're not just going combat. Because when you're running a dungeon, sometimes that can get old very fast. All right, let's get into your bond. Which is there part of being a game master that you feel especially connected to or passionate about?
So you mentioned in my introduction that I'd written a book. I have written a book before. I like the writing aspect of being a DM a lot more than I like writing books. Because I've tried so many since I've written that one book in 2018. I've tried writing more. I've tried writing a lot more, and it gets frustrating because you get kind of trapped in your own thoughts of things, and you get kind of you railroad yourself down a plot line. At least this is how I find it, and I find I get to a point where I get bored of the plot line because I'm just saying, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, Whereas as a DM, I'm reacting to what the players are doing. So so my story, I have a concept. I have a baddie in my head or a threat in my head. I have them in a situation. There is a very good chance everything I've written goes out the window and I've got to react to it. And not just in the session, but then in the overall narrative.
Yeah.
Like, there was situations in the podcast where they killed NPCs who were supposed to be important later, And what do I do with that? How do I react to that? Where do I put this story? There was one point where they almost killed a BBEG, like, in the 3rd season. Like, and I had to I had to Deus Ex Machina him out of there to make sure that they had a threat. But if they had killed him, I was like, shit, what do I do now? They had done 1 HP, and that's because I buggered up. I cast a spell that had a massive area of effect attack. I hadn't read the spell tooltip in the moment properly, and when I read it, I was like, oh no, this hits everybody, including him. It was it was that whole. I didn't ask how big the room is. I said I cast fireball. It's that kind of thing. So it's like I had to get him out of there. So invented someone around them had the ability of teleport and just got him out of there.
So do you write session, like obviously you have an overall plan of where you'd ideally like to go to, but do you sort of write session to session?
Yeah. I have the overall narrative arc, which, as I've said, frequently gets updated.
Yeah.
But yeah, session to session, and some sessions I'll put really detailed stuff in, especially if it's going to be like a lore-heavy episode or session where they're going to learn a lot of things. There are some sessions that I put in, especially when they're in a dungeon, where my pre-session notes are like 6 lines of just the thing, and then like a collection of links to D&D Beyond and the Monster Manual for what they're going to be fighting.
Yeah.
There was one session, my notes literally consist of, I don't know what the fuck to do. And because we'd got into a situation where the party had really bent away from what I was planning, and I had no idea in the lead up to recording where it was going to go. So I just kind of went, right, this is an entirely improvised episode. Let's see what happens. And thankfully, it got to a point where I could pick up my narrative and put them back onto the path for where I wanted them to go. But so it's that kind of storytelling to me is so much more dynamic and so much more interesting. You can because it's like, I guess it's like when you're writing with a partner and you're kind of bouncing ideas back off each other, and you get a more cohesive or a story that you wouldn't have considered by yourself. This, I'm doing it with 4 other people, but they don't know where the story's going. They're just in the moment reacting. So it's just like I have a big reveal at the end of the campaign that I'd started in like the first 10 episodes somewhere. And I'm constantly trying to not have that reveal spoiled and keep them going so they have that in the last episode. But they keep kind of interfering. Not necessarily interfering, but they keep kind of engaging with that character that I didn't want to be in it that much because of the reveal. Which
they can be drawn into certain NPCs that you create just because. Yeah, I think that's just a DM thing. Like you might just do a particularly funny voice or describe someone in a certain way, and suddenly that NPC is a lot more important to the players than it ever was to your story, and you're suddenly like having to develop this NPC.
So they have this NPC that they kind of encounter several times throughout it called Sod.
Yes,
and Sod in the kind of immediate moment. He was originally created just off a whim. And like the name Sod came from nowhere.
Great Feywild. He encapsulates everything I love and hate about the Feywild.
Yeah, and he's just this little satyr that's he's very tricksy and constantly trying to get them to do bargains and stuff like that. And one of the Treble is constantly like playing with that power and like making bargains and then never expecting to have to own up to them. But I just picked up a kind of random, slightly Yorkshire, slightly Lancashire accent and went, "You're right, Mr. Treble, you're right," and start talking like that, really high. And then he just became this character that they brought back multiple times and just kind of, I never had a character sheet for him. He never went into combat. Like, he was not on their side or against them, really. And there was no plan to him. I just kept expanding what his powers could do. He would just kind of blink in and out of existence or could move them through time and space for whatever narrative purpose needed. And he became really fun to play. The other one was Orapan. Orapan was this kind of, I based him on the boiler room guy from Spirited Away in his look. He was this guy, big mustache, lots of arms and legs, kind of a Spider-Man. And originally he was just supposed to be an eccentric
Do you know who he
Potion shop
reminded
owner.
me of? Did you ever listen to Dungeons and Daddies podcast by chance?
Oh yeah, Scam Likely. He's absolutely Scam Likely.
Yeah, Scam
That's where the
Likely.
voice
That's
came
who
from. Yeah.
yeah, that's who I was like. Oh, that's he's doing
Um,
a Scam Likely. Oh,
yeah,
see,
and
I've
like,
picked up on that.
yeah, so he started out just as a vendor. But they found him so funny because the whole thing was like, I didn't explicitly make him gay, but he was really kind of taken by Stigveld. And I think there's one point like they leave the shop and come back, and like Stigveld's kind of like hanging on the ceiling with Orapan's arms wrapped around him.
Yeah.
And he was so much fun to play because you just get to talk like this, and you get to be very camp with it.
So,
Stigveld.
yeah, I think that's one of the good things about your podcast, because I think a lot of sort of actual players, they'll stay away from that dynamic just because they don't want to upset someone, or it can be a little bit funny. But that is something that you capture. That is what it's like playing with your mates, because you know what you can get away with, and you give zero fucks. That you're just leaning into it. Your players are leaning into it, and everyone's having a good time. And I think a lot of those actual players sort of steer away from that just in case they possibly upset someone.
Yeah, the players themselves are in the podcast. Because it's their first time playing it, their characters are kind of amplified versions of just themselves. This is not to denigrate them in any way, but like the thought of the character. Sorry, excuse me. Thought of the character tended to happen while we were playing. They didn't. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing or anything, but like, yeah, it's because it was their first characters. There's a lot of their own personality in them. Whereas, some people I play with who've been playing for years.
Well, I know Stig loves wrestling.
Yeah, I know. I play with some people who've been playing for like decades, like since AD&D, and they are able to build a character that's got nothing like them, and to perform that. So, knowing that these characters are kind of based on themselves a little bit, you can play with that, and you can, like the whole thing with Orapan being fawning over Stigveld. I know it doesn't make Stig uncomfortable, but Stig knows that Stigveld would be uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
So I get to play into that. So then Stigveld amps up Stig amps up Stigveld's uncomfortableness. And we go back and forth with that. The same with Treble and Sebastian Graves. Like, because Oodles is a bit of a kind of, pansexual weirdo in himself. So give him a hot vampire because to deal with, and then he's all of a flutter, and it's fun that way. But also credit to Oodles for not playing a horny bard. He didn't. The backstory had him as a horny bard, and then the consequences stopped him being horny going forward. So yeah, when he wanted to play. When he said he wanted to play like a purple clad halfling, I was like, oh, please don't be Scanlan. Please just don't do Scanlan. And I'm glad he didn't.
No. Okay. Finally, your flaw. What's one part of your GM style that you're currently trying to improve or refine?
Time management. I'm terrible for time management. But that's not just as a GM, that's just in general. I'm just a bit flighty with time. As a GM, it's my repertoire of voices. Because I'm not trying to be a voice actor or anything like that, but it's just trying to find differentiations in voice. In context, they all work. They always know who they're talking to. But, all guards are Cockneys. All orcs sound like Peter Jackson's orcs.
My orcs are all Eastern European. I don't know. Years of doing bad Arnold impersonations.
Mine are always what about their legs? That kind of thing. Reach back on the menu, boys. So I've got tonality. I can move up and down my range quite well, but it's just trying to have like a wider variation. Like all posh people sound like this, whether they're male or female. And all the guards sound like this, and they oi 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 as they walk around. They all sound like Billy Butcher. Or slimy characters sound even more like Billy Butcher because we had Treble's brother who sounded like this. Hello, darling. That kind of thing. Proper.
The bad New Zealand English Cockney.
Yes.
So it's definitely a Kiwi impersonation of a Cockney accent. So
it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, just spending a bit more time to work on a voice, like set characters who repeated over and over again, like Sword, like Orapan. They all ended up with set voices. Dane Ashglade, the bad guy, they all had set voices. And I practiced them to make sure they always knew when they were talking. But I'm not so good at kind of maintaining a voice sometimes.
So when you do, I know you're focusing on your voice, but do you write down? I'm interested to know how you do your DM notes. So, do you write down what you want the character, like the dialogue that you want to have, or what points you want the information you want to pass on to the players, and you just ad-libbing, or do you?
Yeah,
Do you
when it's like a key NPC or a story NPC, then yeah, it's always kind of they have sometimes there are specific lines if I want to say something that's funny or I've thought of an interesting thing. So there was an NPC that I based on Alex Jones from InfoWars Infamy. Because I just thought it would be funny because he says some insane shit. And with that one, I actually went to another podcast subreddit, a podcast called Knowledge Fight, which is about InfoWars. I don't listen to InfoWars. I need to make that very clear. But I went to their subreddit and says, "What's some really funny things that Alex has said that's like not racist or sexist and stuff like that?" And they gave me a load of his quotes, and I adapted them for D&D. And then I worked on the voice, and I tried to do this kind of weird Texan drawl kind of thing, talk out the side of my mouth, and he's turning the fucking slod's gay, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that, I had all of the very specific joke lines I wanted to say written down. For if I don't have set NPCs in area, but they're going into a town, I will have just lines that need to be communicated to the players, and just whatever NPC they happen to speak to might know one or two of them. A little bit like kind of how they set things out in the D&D adventure modules and say, oh, someone in town will know this, someone in town will know this, that kind of thing. But it's never usually written down as, say, this specific line. It'll just, it'll be like, someone in town will know the way to this dungeon that they need to go to, and then I'll just ad-lib what they actually say.
Yeah, if I have an epic monologue that I want to say, then I'll write something down.
Oh yeah,
but yeah. Otherwise, it's just bullet points for me as well.
Yeah, I think across the campaign I only wrote 3 monologues.
Yeah, the great thing about modern tools like Google Docs and ChatGPT, I find I use a lot in my DM. And the great thing is, I've got both of those on my phone. So whenever inspiration hits me, whether it's at work, whether it's out walking the dog, because I don't know about you, I'm always thinking about my game, and I'll go, fuck, suddenly I'll get hit with something, and I love how you can just open up Google Docs and just type that into a living document.
Yeah, and then I do that. I don't tend to use ChatGPT.
Yeah, I use ChatGPT for a lot of sort of like, just I throw all my Google Docs in there and just give me a quick reference of what the fuck I was talking about, because a lot of the time it's just an incoherent mess. So I'll just copy and paste my Google Docs and go, just organize that for me, please.
I through kind of learning to draw over the past couple of years and stuff like that, I have a pretty strong stance against generative AI. Plus I work with a lot of generative AI in my actual, real life, proper adult job kind of thing. And I don't like them, and I'm not going to get into diatribe about AI, but I avoid using ChatGPT for D&D purposes. I like to kind of riff ideas off people, so I'll talk to my partner. My partner's a very creative person, and I'll talk to her about kind of the ideas that I'm having, and she'll kind of mull it around her head, and she'll go, "Wouldn't it be funnier like this?" or "That wouldn't be entertaining to listen to." Like she's good, like giving me the listener's perspective, because sometimes I'll think of this really cool dungeon idea, and I'll explain it to her, and she goes, "That would be boring as fuck to listen to." And then I'll kind of think back on it and go, "Actually, that would be really boring to listen to." So she gives me like the non-player, because she doesn't play D&D. But she guested a couple of times as Ceridwen. She doesn't play D&D, but she listens to it, so she knows what is interesting to listen to. So she's a really useful resource for me. So I do use her a lot. And she's come up with some of the weirder ideas for the podcast. The whole Dreadbeat plot line, that was her idea.
Nice.
And I'm blaming her for it. It's dreadful. It's very funny, but oh my god. And I'm not going to spoil it if anyone does end up listening to it, because it'll come out of left field. It's not my fault. Someone else's fault. Just that's
cool.
important to point out.
I do use AI a bit.
And that's fine.
I use AI as a tool just to sort of organize my prep into
yeah.
Like I'll write down this is what happened last session. This is what I think I want to go next session. Give me some ideas, and it'll just spit out a bunch of shit, and I'll go, oh, that's shit. Give me again.
I think that I don't disagree with people using it. I just don't want to use it, and I think especially because I'm doing it for a podcast. Yes. I think it's different if you're using it to just kind of push a in-person personal game forward. But I would personally feel really dishonest if I were to use it for a campaign. Like, I don't even really like it. A couple of times I've just completely run out of prep time, and I've just had to buy some maps off Etsy or off or off Incarnate, to get something that I needed for. I'd had it written, but I just didn't have time to make a map. And I always felt really bad about that, because just like, I didn't make this. I wrote this idea and then I adapted it to a map that I found, because it's for a podcast. Like, I don't mind doing it for in-person games or offline games. I will happily buy some maps off someone who's got more time than me. But for a podcast, I want it to be my work,
I steal maps all the time, so I have I have access to all the books on Beyond, and there's no way I'm going to run all the books on Beyond. So I'll go through the adventures, not even reading. Like, for example, I'm not running Princes of the Apocalypse, but I just stole about 12 maps off that adventure, going, I can reskin that into what I need. That's cool.
Which is fine.
So,
but like I say, I wouldn't do that for the podcast.
No.
On a slight tangent, have you noticed that the official WotC books are getting worse?
Yeah. You mean like Vecna and Vecna was terrible.
So I've got my offline campaign. I'm running. We last year we ran Spelljammer, Light of Xerxes.
Oh, that was shit. Yeah,
it was terrible.
Sorry.
And we're currently running through Lost Mines of Phandelver, the Shattered Obelisk one, the Phandelver and Blue. That's it. It's full of mistakes.
First half of the book is the first half of the book is great. It's got a solid foundation, but that's just like DLC. It's just so tacked on. It makes no sense. You can tell mind flayers were in vogue so hot right now.
It's like, because I'd ran Lost Mines of Phandelver before and enjoyed it, and it was a great starter campaign.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I've just finished that, and I've kind of segued it into Tyranny of Dragons, but I'm not even using 80% of Tyranny of Dragons. I'm just using plot points.
Because these guys like pay me as a DM to do it, so they wanted to run the book. So I'm running it pretty by the book. Yeah, but there's nothing. This might just be me kind of misinterpreting what the core adventure books are supposed to be like. But there's nothing actually interesting for the characters. There's just a series of events and NPCs.
And the monsters in that book aren't fun. They're not fun monsters.
No, what are them? I can't remember the name of them. The pyramid-like jelly things that come off from Mind Flayer hives.
Yeah.
I can't remember what they're called.
It feels very tacked on. It's like, hey, this adventure is our most popular adventure. What should we add onto it? And someone's gone, well, Mind Flayers are popular now thanks to Baldur's Gate 3. Just put Mind Flayers in it.
They've not. You could dovetail the two really well together, but we're about halfway through the second half of it now, so about 3/4 of the way through the whole campaign. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. What's going on here? And I'm having to try and find fun things for the characters to have. So I've just created NPCs for them that will follow them or be antagonists. Or I think there's one point they find a giant badger and it's now become their pet because one of them was nice to it and stuff like that. Just try and keep them entertained.
I'm running a hybrid of Lost Mine of Phandelver, Dragon of Icespire Peak, and
We did
Tyranny
that.
of
That was our
Dragons.
first one that we did with that group, and actually, I really enjoyed Ice Spire Peak. That was a good little one. That I will say, Shadow Obelisk is better than Light of Xerxes. That was really poor. And it's a shame because I love the Spelljammer setting.
Yeah.
But there was no ship combat in it. And where were the ship combat rules? I had to steal them from
DM's Guild did most of the work for them.
where did I steal it from? Was it Into Avernus? Saltmarsh, that was it. Saltmarsh.
Yeah, Wizards of the Coast have sort of relied on the community to do most of the hard work for them.
It's like a bloody Bethesda game. It doesn't work until the players get hold of it.
Yeah, fix it and patch. All right, we better get into the topic, mate. We're already 40 minutes in. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to discuss running a long-term homebrew actual play podcast. So after 60 episodes, how did you keep the story fresh and exciting for both the players and the listeners?
So I try to because it's a show rather than a campaign. We only ever record for 2 or 3 hours at a time, as opposed to like a normal at-home D&D session can be what 4, 5, 6 hours, depending on how well you're into it.
My Friday games start around 7:30 and have been finishing about 1 in the morning.
Exactly.
But I need to cut that short. So I'm fucked by that.
So yeah, we're like, because we play remotely, we all live around the country, we all have different working schedules. It tends to be about 2 or 3 hours recording, and that then gets edited down to like hour and a half, 2 hour episode. I try to, it's the one writing trick I took from Dan Brown of all people. Have an exciting incident every kind of half hour or so. Like try and keep them going. So I try and end episodes when something's about to happen, or where I can do like a little mini cliffhanger.
Yeah, you do that really well. I want to give you a compliment there.
Yeah, thank you. I also try and sometimes do it where they've just done the thing, and then it becomes then the next episode's about what the fallout of that is. So it's to try and keep people coming back over and over again, but also to keep the players interested. Yeah. There's been so many times like we'll finish recording, like, oh, what happens next? I want to do the next bit. It's just like it's fucking 10 o'clock on. You've got work in the morning. Like we can't do this. Yeah. But that's how I know that I'm doing it right and keeping them going with it.
I had that on last Friday, for example. Yeah, about 11 o'clock. I was like, oh, should we call it? And they're like, oh, we've only got 2 more rooms left of the dungeon. Let's just finish the dungeon. And I'm like, oh, fuck it. And then next thing it's 1 in the morning.
I've got 2 rooms of the dungeon does not mean it's quick.
Yeah.
I mean, in my offline game on the paid for one, the Wave Echo Cave took them like 4 sessions. It took so long. But yeah, it's so across the 60 episodes, it was just trying to find places for them to do things, and also not being too precious about the setting. Like allow them to affect the setting, allow them to change things, and send them to weird. I sent them to like the center of the world tree. Like got them into interdimensional bullshit for 2 episodes because they ended up there. Why not?
Yeah, fantastic locations. You did those really well. But do you think like just having 2 hours is kind of it's more manageable? Like going in as a DM, hey, I've only got to prep for 2 hours. 2 hours worth of content.
I think it's more manageable, but it's also it stops me getting lost in the weeds of things. Like you'll notice my descriptions of places tend to be very high level. I do descriptions in a way where I want the listener and the player to kind of fill in a lot themselves. And it's not because I'm being lazy. I could describe the far end of a fart about what the inside of Endilo's Rest looks like. A city inside of a mountain. I could talk for hours about what it looks like, what it smells like, what the buildings are made of, all that kind of thing. But you don't need to know that. I think what was the description I gave it? It was something. It's a city inside of a mountain.
That's an investigation. That's an investigation check.
Yeah, it's like a city built inside of a mountain because because it has obviously a finite edge to it. Everything's built up like stacks of slums. But the buildings are made like that you would see in kind of Morocco, Marrakesh, Cairo, stuff like that. And that gives, there's 2 or 3 sentences that gives you a vibe of the place. Because I've mentioned those locations, you then have, from your own knowledge, so it's going to be kind of a North African feel to it. It's probably going to have these sounds, these smells. The buildings have this whitish texture to them. That kind of it saves me having to describe it and boring people. I do my best not to. If I don't really time myself, but I kind of am aware of the clock when I'm talking. And if I've been talking for 3 minutes, I think that's too much. Let them talk.
Yeah.
Let them do something. So if I'm talking for too long at any given time on a description, they're just going to turn off, like the players and the audience. So I try to keep it fresh like that, to give them like a simple description of something, let them fill in the steps themselves. And if they want more information on something, they can ask for it. They can investigate roll, they can perception roll, or if it's just something general, I can just tell them. But the base description is always kind of very succinct, so they can get a vibe of the place.
You use a lot of tropes, which I do as well, and tropes work for a reason. And I had this discussion with someone else the other day on the podcast as well. Like, I use a lot of things that like players will pick up on because it's from a movie or it's from a popular pop culture, and they'll go, "Oh, like in such and such," and I'll go, "Yes, exactly," because that has done a lot more work for me. That's got you mentally to the place where I want you to be.
Absolutely,
straight away. And I don't know if that, some people can argue that is taking them out of the immersion side of the game, but I feel it's not. I like it because it's getting them. We're on the same page now. We've described the setting. We've got the vibe. We've got the vibe.
Puts the player where I want them, and it comes down to it as well with like the quote unquote original songs that we did for it. They're all parodies of existing songs, so it's all stuff that they understand. The first one we did was parodying "Toss a Coin to Your Witcher" because that was still popular after 2 years after that came out. But it made sense. Oodles rewrote the lyrics to it and sang the song, and I found a backing track for it. And it became this thing that said who Treble was, who the party were, and how he approached music. Then the next one was his brother, Quattro, a different kind of bard, doing The Devil Went Down to Georgia, singing, but rewritten. There's a bit of a kind of a rocky metal version, and taking the piss out of Treble because they're supposed to have a rift between each other. So it's like, before you even met Quattro himself, that song is there and tells the listener what he thinks of his brother, and stuff like that. So like all these kind of, I think we did about 8 songs in total over the 60 episodes, because I did a musical episode using Has Been Hotel music, which was really fun because why not? Everyone loves a musical episode. So I put in all these different kind of sounds and textures and other things into it to keep it fresh and to keep it silly and to keep it light for them.
Yeah, nice. All right. What's been the biggest challenge in maintaining a cohesive narrative over such a long campaign?
The players.
Fucking players.
The fucking players. Cohesive narrative is, because I started with a start place and an end place, it was to say, how do I make these two meet without railroading them? So it was kind of trying to put things in their way or give them things that would naturally move them on. So I give them a flying ship. So because they were moving very slowly across the world.
That's a smart way. That's a smart way to deal with travel, because travel is always notoriously hard to run, and it can bog down your game.
And for the sake of, again, a podcast, I don't want to do like a Critical Role have the traveling episodes where you'll have like nearly 12 hours of content where they are just getting from place to place. You know, I don't want to do that. I'm very happy to hand wave a lot of stuff and just rule on an encounter table, see if something happens in the middle.
The Star Wars screen wipe.
Yeah. But yeah, kind of starting where they started in the prison that they broke out of, and then the ending battle in High Dawn, and they're starting on the other side of the world. How do they get over there? And trying to make it 60 episodes, because again, I didn't want it to be like 120, 140 episodes like Critical Role. Again, a lot of my inspiration comes from Dimension 20, which are like 20 episodes a season or a campaign. Trying to keep it short and succinct is very difficult. But again, kind of one of my other inspirations was, and you mentioned before, Dungeons and Daddies.
Yeah.
And the way they apply kind of rules on travel, it's like they just say, oh, you get in the Honda Odyssey and you drive to this place. Like, that's what you do. That's how you do it, you know? Because otherwise, for a listener, I think it can become boring because I got bored with the Critical Role traveling episodes and I'd skip ahead. I'd read a rundown of what happens in the episodes and skip ahead to where it got interesting again.
A lot of the early sort of published modules, guess they were trying to showcase the Forgotten Realms as their setting. So I know, Tyranny of Dragons, Storm King's Thunder, Princes of the Apocalypse, they had you all over the Sword Coast. Like you're going from like Baldur's Gate to Neverwinter to over here to, and all they just gave you was random tables. So anyone that would run those by the books, oh my goodness, they're just a slog fest. It's not fun.
Yeah, and I think what I tried to do with them, I tried to give them like a core location for each season. So for people who haven't listened, I separate the 60 episodes into 4 15-episode seasons. To give me a narrative arc, but also to give them like a sense of we've done something, we've finished this act, and then we have a little break, and then we come back and do the next bit. So there were kind of 4 core locations. The first season and the last season, they had like a kind of a country's worth. And then the second and third season, they had they were basically based around cities with a little bit of traveling in and out in each one. But it gives them kind of an anchor point and a place to be. But then also they were working towards the travel bit. Like, how did we get to the next place? So part of the second season was them finding this flying ship. The first 3 episodes of the third season were them flying around and things happening, and then they got to a city where the bulk of that season took place as they were trying to get access to a teleportation network. And that got them to the country they needed to be, which was across the sea, across a dangerous sea, in a completely different part of the world, for them to do the last bit of the campaign, which was in this country that they talked about a lot. So getting them from place to place was always difficult to try and keep a cohesive narrative, because I didn't want to hand wave everything away. I didn't want to Deus Ex them to be, you're there now, It's like I wanted to make it so that they felt like they were traveling, but they were also moving where I wanted them. Because I generated these countries with like 10 or 15 different places they could go. I was like, I need you to go to that place, but I can't tell you I want you to go to that place. It's like, like one of the maps, larger, the country in the third season, like, there's a place they'd found an old map. It wasn't a new map, it was an old map. And like one of the places says, here be dragons. I'm like, please don't find that interesting. I don't want to do a dragon adventure, but I just needed to make this look old. Or like there was, the mysterious tower, a note on the map that says what's down here. And then there was the big city, Israeli, which is where they got to, where I wanted them to go. I was like, when I would give them a map, I was like, are they going to go where I want them to go? Are they going to go like all these different points around it before they get to Israeli?
That's you can't put a carrot out there and not expect them to.
And I was prepared. Like, if there was stuff for them to do if they went to any of those places.
Yeah.
But it was more for the pacing of it. It's like, because there was so much I wanted them to do in Israeli. It's like, I want you to get there quickly because I can get all this cool shit out.
Yeah. I'm thinking of doing something similar. So one part I did like in Tyranny of Dragons is the bad guys have a flying citadel, and it's a storm giant's castle, which is meant to be pretty much, because it's made from ice and everything, it's almost invisible, and it flies around in the clouds and stuff. So I was thinking of maybe putting that in the Sword Mountains, where they're going to head to deal with Cryovane, and having Cryovane in there. And if they could possibly convince the storm giant that runs the place to be their mate, then maybe they'll have maybe that will take care of my transport options, and they can just float from location to location in a big citadel. But we'll see.
It could be, and then you could take like a thing with the people. Some people think it's this flying citadel of heroes, but other people think that's where baddies live.
Yeah.
No hero would have a flying ice citadel.
Yeah, it's just I think that's an important part of being a DM. Like, that's just it's not established. That's where I'm going to go with this campaign, but it's an idea that's in my mind. That's like, I could possibly.
You could.
I could put that there. They might not go for it, but yeah.
There's always a fun thing when you hand them something and they're immediately suspicious of it.
Yes. You've done your job right. If your players have trust issues, you have done your job right.
They have significant. They are traumatized by me.
Yes. I think I've told this to you before in the past. I fed my players pies. Um,
Yes.
that was run by a Wereat tavern. They were investigating sailors who were going missing in this dock ward, and it led them to this pub that was run by a couple of I described these guys as they were halflings, and they had like monobrows, and they're very sort of uh, Weasley looking,
Yeah.
and all they had on the menu was pies, and they were investigating this sailors going missing, and then they found that it was basically Wereats were capturing sailors and turning them into pies. But unfortunately, my players had already eaten about 6 pies before they discovered that little twist, and that developed some trust issues moving forward with our
The
game.
worst pies have never went on. The worst pies.
Okay, how have the player characters surprised you in their development, and how has that shaped the world or story?
So I mean, my players, not necessarily the player characters, but my players surprised me the most by just how into it they got.
Mm.
And how keen they were to have story moments, like all the times where like one of them would text me out of game and just be like, "Hey, this would be a really cool thing for me to do, wouldn't it?" Or I'm not happy with my character. Can he do this? It's like the whole thing with treble multiclassing. Because he wasn't happy playing a bard. He wanted me to kill him off, and I was like, "No, maybe let's try something." And like then the idea of like getting a few levels in sorcerer, so he got some offensive spells worked for him, and he enjoyed playing the character so much more. But I think, yeah, it was when they started putting their own ideas into it. So, like I mentioned before, the vampire character Sebastian Graves turns up. Oodles came up with him by himself. It wasn't my idea to have him, but then I incorporated him into the game, and I gave him something extra, and we did a horror episode with Graves, which was great. Oodles is still traumatized by it. He still doesn't like it whenever I start playing music in Roll20.
Yeah.
Because I give him the creepy music in the background as he was being hunted. And he also doesn't like it when I use dynamic lighting, because that was the first time I'd showed him dynamic lighting in that. So he did not like that level at all.
Triggers.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, it's sort of, I think probably round about the midpoint of the campaign, I started realizing how attached they were to their characters. The only kind of rule I'd been given for any of the characters was from Candy, which was that Capri's cat, Proserpine, could not be involved in combat. Because she based him off her actual cat, like Candy's actual cat. Like he looks like the ragdoll cat that she owns. And I did something where he was momentarily periled, and she nearly burst into tears. I'm like, "Oh, you're involved. You're invested in this." Held that one back for a bit. But anytime I was going to put him in peril, I would like text her and go, "By the way, this might happen in the next episode. Don't get too upset." But and you get there was a moment where he's in a lot of peril in the last episode, and she was a bubbling mess.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like they really surprised me with how attached they got to their characters. And how sad they were when it ended, and these characters aren't coming back. They're going to play new characters in the next campaign.
So are you going to be rolling the new rule set in the next campaign out of interest?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
So
going to use the 2024 rule set, which for the characters they're picking, there's not much difference. It'll probably stay mostly the same feeling, but even then, again, I didn't stick too strongly to 5e anyway.
Same world.
Same world, different country. So I built Erethria, the world I'm in, and it is a full world. Most things happen on this kind of central continent called Shial, and then there's kind of like some several kind of islands, principalities, small continents elsewhere in the world. But most of what I've built is around this kind of one central continent.
You've kind of segued into the question anyway, so let's do it. With such a rich homebrew setting, how do you track the details and ensure that the world feels alive and consistent?
I'll tell you when I know how to. So I create the framework for the world. I've created all of the kind of the main countries on this central continent. and they all have capital cities. They all have the name of the ruler, kind of dominant races, what the kind of biome is like. But that's it. I keep it light with these things. Oh, I've also got kind of a list of which countries are friends or enemies with other countries, and where there's been like significant wars that would be in the lore. Like there was something that got mentioned a lot in the campaign, which is the Draconic Wars between two countries, where one was a primarily dragonborn country and one was a human country. And it was like a paranoid mad king on the human country tried to wipe out the dragonborn because he thought they were all evil. You know, that kind of. But it's at that level of detail.
Pot smoking hippies.
Yeah. It's at the level of detail where I can bullshit if they ask questions about it, and then that goes into the lore. Whatever I say, as a DM, whatever you say becomes canon in that story. Unless you specifically say I'm retconning this thing because that made no sense. So I do things at a really high level, and then in the sessions, that's when the low level stuff comes out, and 99 times out of 100, I'm pulling it out of my arse in the moment, but it's whatever makes sense.
Do you have like a journal on your world sort of thing?
Yeah, I've got a Google Doc which has the stuff which has kind of like pinned comments and stuff like that. So stuff like I want to refer back to, or if I've given some lore that might become important to the story later, that's highlighted in a different color and all that kind of thing. So I do track it, but I don't write it ahead. I don't write too much of it ahead of time because I think, and I found this when I was writing my book, world building, you can get lost in it.
Yeah.
So, like, I do like the 50,000 foot view and work my way down to like the microscope view.
My experience is players seem to enjoy like DM's world building as much as we enjoy a player that turns up with a 10-page backstory. It's just,
it's all about what's relevant, and I think like your world document should be a living document because you're always going to change things or have different ideas or think of something newer or funner or cooler. And like when I'm in the midst of running a game, I've got several tools open. So I've got that Google Doc open where if I need to refer to something, I can go find it. But then I've also got like fantasy name generator open just so I can pull out a name if they ask about something. It says, "Oh, what was the King of Welbeck 10 generations ago?" And I'll find a kingly name, you know.
Yeah.
And then he gets put into the lore, and then I can start making up stuff about him. But I don't want to fall in. I've never wanted to fall into the trap of really deep world building that like Tolkien would do, or like Brandon Sanderson or George R.R. Martin does, because you're not writing a linear story. So sometimes you're just wasting effort. I'd rather spend more time making really cool maps or really cool encounters than working out some great poet from the Northern Realms that influenced the musical stylings of this, that, and the other. You know, it's like that doesn't matter to the players. It doesn't matter to the game. If they ask about it, it comes off the dome. I'll just say something that then becomes that lore. And
I like the idea of world building. It's something like you say. I go too deep in shit. I get too nerdy, and whenever I've tried it, I've just lost myself in the world and not focused on the game. So I do like the idea of using something like I set most of my games in Forgotten Realms because I do like the fact that all that lore exists, but I don't view it as that. It's not necessarily canon in my version of the Forgotten Realms. Do you know what I mean? Like these are just locations, and I'll take what I like and I'll move things around. You're not going to bump
into Gale of Waterdeep.
No. Well, maybe you are. So yeah, and I do like the fact that there is so much lore out there. Like you can just go, oh, my players want to fuck with the Wizards of Thay, so you can just type that into YouTube and get 15 different videos on that, and then just come back and go, okay, well, this is the general idea of these guys. These guys are scary because when they kill people, they then raise them as undead and use them as their army. So they start using their enemies against their enemies, sort of thing, and that's fucking scary, you know. So yeah,
I take some things from like established D&D lore. Tends to be not in the way that most people would, though. Like if I want to have a kind of a lore for a weird monster or a weird boss, that's when I'll kind of crib a little bit from not even D&D Beyond, like D&D Wiki or the Wikia. It has a lot of homebrew stuff in it, and there's like stuff I can pick and choose and adapt from it. Like Gorthank the Defiler's backstory, the weirdness that he was. That came from about 7 different homebrew monsters that I just kind of found these little bits that I found were interesting and I put them together. And the players barely asked about it, but it was there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of stuff. I will adapt from a lot of places, but again, because it's for a podcast, I try to be 100% original as far as I can be.
Yeah.
So yeah, as it stands, every country I've generated, there's about 30 countries in the world in total that I've created. Every country has a capital, a ruler, primary race, and are they at war or are they friends, whoever. When they get to that country or when they're getting near that country, that's when I'll generate a map for it. I have a world map generated. And then I'll take that shape and I'll build a map for it. And that's when I'll start thinking about, okay, so I know the capital's here and what it's called. Where are the trade routes? Where is the mountains? Where are caves? Where would ports be if it's on the sea? That kind of thing. Like campaign 2 is going to start in a country that's been referred to a few times, the campaign called Greybar. And that's like the northernmost, so it's practically Arctic Circle kind of thing. So I want it to be a kind of a frozen tundra kind of place.
Yeah.
Where there's a little bit of a survival element to it. But naturally they'll end up moving to the next country down, which I think is Trossland and all these kind of other places down there. And so I'll build those maps out as they're moving around the world.
Nice. Okay. Looking back to the first few episodes, how has your approach to DMing changed?
I don't think my approach to it has changed that much. My knowledge of the game has changed a lot. I know more about it. There's a lot more random stats, facts, figures, spell castings, and all that I can just pull off the top of my head that I don't have to search for. But I think actually the one thing I guess that has changed, this is the hardest one to answer. I guess I've become more permissive. First few episodes, I really did railroad them a fair bit, getting them to go specific things. I had this encounter made. Go do this. And as time went on, I think probably it was about time they got to the Fairwoods in the first season. I started just kind of like taking my hand off the leash and just letting them do what they wanted.
Yeah.
Like, and I kind of approached it in a different way, whereas I was kind of putting them in situations where I knew they needed to do something. But when I realized that they were quite capable of screwing with all of my plans, regardless, or doing their own thing, or approaching things in a weird way. Like, there was one early fight that Treble says, "I don't want a part of this," and he walked off. I was like, all right, fair enough. It was at that point I started then being more like a quest giver. So like they get to the Fairwoods, the Fair say, "We can help you, but we need you to do this thing first," which gets them to the event that I created, rather than me saying, "Oh, you go down the woods and you find this." It was like I gave them an NPC who said, "Go do this," and that's kind of what I learned to do. Is more not necessarily tell them to do things, but tell them that there are things they can do that will help them. So that's what I learned quite early on, and I feel like I took that towards the end. But by the time we got to the kind of the 4th season, they were also powerful anyway, and they were quite focused on where they needed to go. It was more me pushing them away from that to get enough content for a season, because they were powerful enough and strong enough. They could have gone and fought the last boss at like episode 45. But I wanted to direct them in other places. So that's where I kind of then had to start being almost an antagonist to them to kind of push them in different directions. But yeah, I guess it was just being more permissive and just letting them make their own fun.
Yeah, I think, we're all guilty of that. And I think as you get more confident knowing your world and where things are located, if they do go in opposite directions, I always have sort of like encounters in my back pocket. Like I'll have an idea of where they're going to go, but then I'll also go, but what if they don't and they decide to go that way? I'll have something like, I'll just pull this encounter out, which will, buy me some time or slow something down if I need to. I'm not married to it, and it's not really important, but
I have quite a couple of like D100 tables of just random encounters, some combat, some non-combat. that I can do to kind of slow down an episode if they're moving too quickly. There was one encounter they had in the last season where they meet a guy who just has like hundreds of potions and none of them have labels on. That came from one of those encounter tables. And it was just something just to give them like 15 minutes to slow down on something while I thought ahead of what they were going to do next.
Yeah. It's a lot easier, like I said before, when you've just got that 2-hour window. But when you're running these epic long games, like I have been recently, it's a little bit more overwhelming because you're like, sometimes I come with way too much content. Because I'm like, I just got.
There's nothing worse though than getting halfway through a recording or a session and realizing you've run out of content.
Yeah. That's my fear. That's one of my DM fears. Like, I don't have anything planned for this. Do I? And you're sitting here going, do I just make this up and ad-lib it, or do I just call a game? And I think you need to judge that in yourself. A lot of that can be based on your energy levels at the time.
Yeah, I think one of my strengths as a DM is my ability to like ad-lib and bullshit.
Yeah.
Like I said, there are some entire episodes of Scorched which are just made up on the spot by me because I've had no idea what to do, and we start the episode and I'll say, "So you're in this place you were last time," and then they start talking. And that gives me something. They start talking in character, and then that gives me an idea for something. And I go, "Oh, this character walks in and he says this to you, and all that kind of thing." And then all of a sudden, there's an encounter that they have to deal with, or there's something to push them further forward in the story. And then I've gotten past that little bit of writer's block, and I have an episode. But I've had like a handful of lines of prep at the beginning because I've had no idea what they're doing.
Do you try and find out your players' intentions before the next game? Like, nope. Hey guys, what are you planning to do? Nope. Anything like that?
Again, I want the spontaneity of it.
Okay.
There are occasions they will come to me and say, "Hey, in the next session, I'd like to do this," or if there is a very specific event that I need to happen for the main story, not necessarily whatever they're doing where they are, but for like if there's going to be like a big event that will affect the major narrative, I will say, "Hey, this is going to happen," to the specific player so they're prepared. So like if I'm trying to think of an example of it. There was one in the very final boss battle, and I'm not going to spoil what happens with it. But I said to Oodles, "By the way, this is going to happen. I'm behind the curtain here because it's for the podcast." And I just said, "Tell me you failed the roll."
Yeah.
And then something happened that was narratively important.
Yeah.
And I don't fudge rolls, and I don't kind of generally screw around with what the dice say. I'd always tend to follow the dice say, unless there is a very specific dramatic moment I need. I'll tell them to fudge a roll because it's for the story.
Yeah.
And I mean, people might think I'm a bad DM for that, but I'll hold my hands up and say, all podcasting DMs do that because sometimes we need something to happen.
You need the drama when it's a podcast.
The drama. Yeah.
Okay. I can create it. I also do like a lot of dynamic stuff. Like, for example, Lost Mine of Fendelver. If they don't, so I'll give them the option to deal with the orcs. If they don't deal with those orcs, then in the back of my mind, I've got that little, I wrote a little post that orcs are still in play. So I can always bring those bad guys to go fuck with them or do something. If they get especially attached to a certain NPC or a certain location in town, then I might set that on fire because and you know what I mean? Because you did, and it's set on fire by the people that you guys didn't deal with, so you're partially responsible because that drives the story. Drives the story forward. And it shows that your world is dynamic and alive, and it's like, well, maybe this wouldn't have happened if you guys actually didn't turn down that quest.
Yeah, there's an element to making sure the players have some level of consequence for their actions or inactions. In my offline campaign, so in Shattered Obelisk, in Shattered Obelisk, there's a moment when they're in Phandalin, and it was quite early on. It was them trying to kind of work out the things that they needed to do to find Wave Echo Cave.
There's a point. I remember one of my players going, "Fuck, I don't want to talk to anyone else. We'll just get another side quest."
Well, they were going to get a side quest from, I think, is it Amelia the farmer? And And so I described them kind of walking up, and like the little kind of tool tip in the book is that like Amelia's trying to like get the cow to plow, and the cow's being stubborn and not happy about it. And one of our one of our players, the bard, says, "I know, I'll be helpful," and he cast Mage Hand and got it to smack the cow on the arse. And so, like, Essentially says, "That's what you want to do?" He's like, "Yeah, that's what I want to do." He says, "Did you warn Amelia first?" He's like, "What do you mean?" He says, "Okay, well, the cow runs her over and she fails the dexterity saving throw and she's dead." And then they're like, "Oh shit!" And so then
Is
we've
that
got
the
a
one?
cow
Is that the
careening
one with the?
around.
Is that the one with the kid as well?
Yeah, she's got a
Yeah.
kid.
So
Yeah,
you
and,
also made an orphan as well.
yeah. And so like,
You created Fenderlin's Batman.
so, so then this is, but there's the cleric. There's the cleric on the other side. They pick up the body and take it to the cleric. Says, "Please, can you cast Revivify on this one?" Says, "Do you have a diamond worth 500 gold pieces?" "No, we don't have 500 gold pieces. Then I can't revive her. But I can't revivify her, but I can raise undead." And so like so you get that level of chaos. I enjoy that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I enjoy that stuff as well. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, mate. I told you this would be about an hour, and we've gone way over.
Oh, it's fine.
What are some unique challenges of running a campaign designed for an audience, and how do you balance entertaining the players and the listeners?
So the kind of the unique challenges is because the players are making notes. They have references back to stuff that happened. Listeners don't. So I need to like, if there is something that is like a callback to an earlier episode, I need it to be very fucking obvious what it is. I can't be
Yeah.
subtle about these things, and I have to do it in a way as if.
So I have a question there. There's a trick I've noticed with podcasts. Sorry to interrupt you. There's a trick
No,
I
it's fine.
noticed with podcasts that, and TV shows are notorious for doing this, and I think this is a TV show trope. So TV shows will purposely show you a recap previously on, and they'll show you something from like about 4 episodes ago, and then suddenly that would be relevant in that particular
Yeah.
episode of the TV show. So is that a trick that you use?
No, I explicitly don't do that because I always want it to be a surprise for the players.
Oh,
So
okay.
if I so when we do the previously things, also I get them to do it as well, as much as me. But it's always what happened in the last episode. But there was like there was a Doppler character who had been about 5 different NPCs that they'd encountered throughout it. And when they eventually kind of revealed the truth of him, it was like, oh, it was this guy, and it was this guy, and it was this guy, and all these kind of little NPCs who had either been quest givers or just random important people that they had had enough of a conversation for that the players, without looking at their notes, remembered who they were. That was how I had to approach that, because for a listener, like, the listeners are invested in what we're doing, but they're not as invested as the players because they don't have to play it. They're listening to it. They're listening to the performance of it. So it was like, remember this character from like a year ago. It's like, I can't do that. But you can remember the character that asked them to kill a chimera or whatever it was, it's like these important things from these different moments. Or I brought a character back like in episode like kind of 39 that was in episode 2. It's like the audience probably won't remember that character, but they'll remember what they did to that character. So I describe her as the person that you did this to.
Yeah.
Because it was a big moment for them at the second episode. So, it's kind of how you position callbacks and how you position references. Also, with kind of playing for an audience, it's not to get bogged down in lore, like to be very much in the moment in the game. Which goes back to my kind of world building thing, where it's like everything's done at a 50,000 foot view first. It's like that's how I communicate these things to the audience, or even just giving, like you said, those references to, oh, it looks like this from this film. I've done that a few times, or basing a character off a pop culture person. Like, most of our audience is British. They probably don't listen to Alex Jones, but they know who he is, and they know the gag that I'm doing because the first line he did was the gay frogs thing, So, it's like, it's just being really tropey.
You'd probably appreciate this trope I threw in. You know that fungi cavern in Wave Echo Cave?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I did that as like you walk through and there's all these strange mushrooms, and as you get closer, like one of them unfolds like a big egg, starts pulsating.
Oh, nice, very nice. Do love an alien reference.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah. So you take tropes, and that helps the audience get it because we do it on YouTube and we do it on podcast, but not everyone watches the YouTube version. So being able to describe things in a way that the audience will get helps, even if it sounds like in the moment in the game. It can probably sound a bit patronizing to the players because I trust the players and I don't know the players, but it's like I'm playing for an audience here, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. What is one of your most unforgettable moments from your campaign, either in game or during recording?
So there's quite a few. Mostly involving Calbo in the campaign. The monk. So there was one point where, so when they first encountered the flying ship, it was led by ghost pirates, because of course it is, or skeleton pirates rather. And then there was this kind of thing where they went into like a kind of a memory battle kind of thing, and the captain was like describing how they ended up this way. And Calbo, for some reason, it was like, so there's two flying ships. Oh, so two ships on the water in the memory, but the ship is still flying all the time. And Calvo wanted to Errol Flynn his way over to the other ship and failed his dexterity roll. And had to get rescued by one of the other players from falling like hundreds of feet down to the ground. And then he went and tried it again. And the idea was, you're going to fall 100 feet to the ground. And it's like, 1d6 per 10 feet.
Let me just get my d6s ready.
Yeah. So that one was I had me rinse that because why would you try it again? You don't have to roll if you go over the gangplank. No, he had to swing over on a rope. The other one was a little bit later in that season, which was kind of in. So there was this 2-episode run where they go into this kind of church that's corrupting Endeal's Rest. And the first one they had to go incognito, they had to go in disguise, and Candy and Treble.
I remember this one.
Yeah, Candy Noodles were like disguised as nuns, and they go and they're doing the whole fucking Mrs. Doubtfire. Oh no, speaking in this Scottish accent like that, and I was showing them some really grim shit, like some really awful stuff, and they're going on like that, and they're killing themselves laughing. And I wanted to strangle a lot of them, because I was trying to do dramatic, and they were just pissing about.
Yeah, but
then we got to this big boss fight with this kind of disguised mind flare, because fucking why not at level 8 throwing a mind flare at them. And they're fighting this thing, but it turns out there's this kind of like Cthulhu-esque elder tentacle god below the city kind of thing. And Treble was absolutely useless in that fight. So funny. But at one point, like Capri's character was really low health, so he cast Feign Death on her, and without realizing that when someone kind of went unconscious, the Elder God would take them. So so he says cast Feign Death, and like Capri's like, oh, I got like that, and this is so through the window, this giant tentacle comes, wraps around Capri's ankle, and pulls her away, and she was furious with him. It was one of the funniest things I've ever done to them, because then Calbo got knocked unconscious just in the combat, and he got taken as well, and then like Stigveld and Treble finished the combat, and they just stood there by themselves. And then the cat, who's a shapeshifter but also telepathic, he's like, "What did you do? Where is she?" kind of thing. Yeah. But oh god, it was so funny. Like, there's a look on Candy's. I did it as a YouTube short or on TikTok as well. There's a look on her face of absolute fury at Oodles. He's like, I didn't know that would happen. It's like, no. You never asked.
No,
they said they were working for an elder god. I always had great fun punishing their lack of curiosity. Mm-hmm. Because there would be so many situations that go into things and like not ask questions about it. Like every major boss that I put always had a cheat way or a cheese way to kill them. Yeah. And they never worked them out. never ask the right questions. I think the first one was they encountered a reanimated dragon in a museum. And the way to kill it, there was a chandelier. I described there was a chandelier hanging above it with a rope that led down to a kind of thing on the side. If they just let that go, it would have killed it in one shot. Instead, they struggle bust through it and ended up killing it with a magic weapon dildo. But but yeah, they struggle bust through that fight. It's just like there was such an easy way to do that, and I did that for all the major bosses. There was always a really simple way to kill them.
As you do.
Because I'm a nice DM like that, but they were just so incurious about things that they never did. Same with like the kind of that big reveal in the last episode. There were hints to that all the way fucking through it.
Yeah,
I'd set that up from like episode 8 to 60.
I think you even said there is a cheat code here at one point.
Yeah, I said there was a cheat code, but like also like this is say like, oh, this isn't what it seems, and all that kind of thing. Multiple NPCs had said that to them throughout. They'd never questioned it.
It can go the opposite away as well, though, for games. Like, you can have overcautious players, and that will drive you crazy. So, if you ever run like a sort of a survival dungeon, like I ran Tomb of Horrors, which is notoriously just known to kill players. And
Tomb of Horrors is terrible.
My players have never approached a dungeon the same way since. So now every dungeon is like 10-foot pole, prodding, checking walls, checking traps, checking doors, and it's like, oh, for fuck's sake.
I've had that with Alien RPG because that one is very explicitly the game master against the players.
Yeah.
Because it's a very deadly game, it's a very quick game. So like anyone I play Alien RPG with does not trust me after the first 10 or 15 minutes.
I think a game that would sort of like lend itself to your sensibilities as for humor and sci-fi is Paranoia. I don't know if you've ever heard of this game.
I've seen that. I need to pick up that book. I've heard very good things about it.
I think you'd love it. It is a utopian future underground, but all the players are clones, and they all work for the complex. It's run by a supercomputer that runs the entire complex, and they are troubleshooters. And the computer constantly thinks that there is terrorists that are out to destroy it, and and it's all these secret organizations. So the players are basically troubleshooters. Their job is to hunt these terrorists out that are there to destroy the supercomputer. And they all have clones, so when they die, they just get another clone. The players are also all terrorists, and they all work for all different secret organizations.
Nice.
So they can get like bonus points for like ratting each other out. So it actually creates like PvP from the outset, even to the character creation side of it. So during the character creation, you choose a ability that you've got a +2 in, and the downside of that is the person to the right of you then gets a -2 in that same ability, and you just go round and round.
All right.
So you're immediately like getting your players offside of each other. So you do need a group that get on well with each other and are down with having a bit of PvP.
I tell you what's good if you want a kind of a fun weird game is Bunkers and Badasses, which is the kind of D&D-ish game that Tiny Tina's playing in Borderlands.
Oh yep.
And Nerdvania actually made it into a full like core rulebook, kind of cribbed off of 5e, but it's basically Borderlands D&D. It's a lot of fun.
Nice. I do like Borderlands. We won't talk about the movie, but I do.
No one should talk about the movie. No one should talk about the movie.
Okay. Last question. Okay. What has it meant to you to build a community of listeners, and what advice would you give someone aspiring to create their own actual play podcast?
It's meant the world. I really, really enjoy when people kind of find our podcast and like say, "Oh, I really enjoyed this," or just randomly correct me on a rule or anything. Like, most people be annoyed by that. Like, no, I like it. It means people have paid attention to whatever we're doing. People have enjoyed the weird, random shit that we do. I love it. I think it's great, and I love that people look forward to it. Or like we have people in our Discord that will like give us a play-by-play as they're listening of going, "Oh my god, what's this? No, don't do that. Why did you go into this room?" That kind of thing. I really enjoy that. I love it so much. I guess the advice I would give to someone who wants to make their own podcast would be don't play the core books. I've listened to a few people who've like done podcasts where they run like official WotC books or like, you know, well known, like Curse of Strahd is a big one. Loads of people do that. It's dull. We all know Curse of Strahd. There's nothing you can do that is particularly inventive or different if you do a core rule book, because people who play D&D know this stuff. Do it for a one-off. Like, we're doing a mid-season special of Alien RPG, and I'm doing the Heart of Darkness core book. Because we haven't played it, it's what we think is interesting, but it's just some content until campaign 2 starts. Like, we're not hanging our hat on being an Alien RPG podcast doing their books, you know? But I think if you do things like Curse of Strahd, Tomb of Annihilation, or whatever, as an actual player, I don't think it'll work as well as doing your own thing. I think lean into the creativity, build your world, get good mics, because I've listened to a lot of ones with crap mics, and they're not expensive these days. You can get really good mics for quite cheap. But do some research, make sure you have the proper technology set up, and more importantly, have fun. Don't worry about it being the most hardcore campaign. Don't try and expect to do something like Critical Role. You know, there's a very good chance you're not a voice actor. Don't try to be one. Instead, play with your friends, and you just so happen to record it. The D&D podcasts that I listen to that I have the most fun with are the ones where you can tell it's just friends fucking around. You know, Dungeons and Daddies, Dungeon Dads, Not Another D&D Podcast, Dimension 20. They're all professional sounding podcasts, and they all have a good following, and most of them have decent money behind them, but they are ultimately friends screwing around. And that's what works. That's what's entertaining. That's what gets people back again and again. Don't worry if you get rules wrong, or if you don't have the most consistent world building or narrative structure or whatever. As long as you sound like you're having fun, people will enjoy what you're doing. And also play the game like there aren't microphones there. It's like the whole dance like no one's looking kind of thing. If you get
contagious.
If you get nervous on the microphone, then you're going to sound nervous on the microphone. But if you're just approaching it as if I'm on a Discord call with my friends, or I'm sat around a table with my friends, and there happens to be a couple of microphones kicking about, that's more entertaining because you're relaxed, you're natural, you get into it, you have your best ideas when you're bouncing off your mates. And yeah, that's kind of it. Just create an original world as best you can. Again, it doesn't need to be the level of detail that I do my world. It doesn't need to be the level of detail that Matt Mercer does his worlds or anything like that. You know, it just needs to be a consistent world that you have, that you can tell a story. And then there's the best thing as well. I said, you know, I know I said don't use the books, but remember, the best DMs know how to steal well.
Yeah.
You know, take things from other podcasts, adapt the ideas from my podcast, and like create your own things. You know, it's fun. Like we all kind of crib from each other in one way, shape, or form. You know, like you said, Orapan, my character, who's a fan favorite, his voice is very much based on Scam Likely from Dungeons and Daddies, you know? Because I found that character fun to listen to, and I thought I can do something with that particular voice. Because it's one that I can...
I'm stealing a lot of my stuff from Dungeon Crawler Carl. I don't know if you listen to that RPG, but...
No, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, I steal a lot of my voices from that, or ideas from that. But
but
I think fun is contagious, like you said. Like, if you're having fun, people will pick up on that and they'll enjoy it. Like, I like podcasts where people are laughing.
Yeah. It doesn't mean you have to do a comedy podcast either. You can do like if you want to do a really grim, dark story, you can. But you need to sound like you're having fun playing it. We don't do grim stuff because we don't have fun playing that.
Well, you try.
I try and give them some grim stuff, and then they'll walk around doing Mrs. Doubtfire impressions, and it turns out to be one of the funniest episodes we've ever done because I'm losing my temper with them because I want them to understand the seriousness. They go, no, we'll just jump into this pool of bodies. Why not?
I think the core books have their purpose, like those podcasts. I listen to some of the core book actual plays just to get a sense of how another DM has run this adventure and what I think works and what I like. If there's a part of the book and I'm like, oh, I don't know how to run that, or I don't particularly like that part, I'll listen to that and go, oh, yeah, no, I'm not going to use that. Or oh, they took an interesting approach. But I
Yeah,
think
I've tried them a few times. I tried. Who was it? I think it was Severed Sons. Their first campaign was Frost Maiden, Rime of the Frost Maiden, and just I didn't find it that entertaining to listen to because I could hear the DM pushing things forward by the book, whereas their kind of later stuff still kind of based on some of the books, but became a bit more free with it. And I found that I personally find that much more interesting when people aren't using a prescribed narrative. I think that's the main issue. Whereas like take things like there's stuff in Dungeons and Daddies where you can see what they've taken from the existing books and existing lore. Take that by all means, but run your own narrative, I think, is better. And you don't necessarily need to be a good story writer. You need to be able to tell a story with your friends.
Yeah.
I think the other thing as well is be friends with the people you're playing with. Don't necessarily go on to like Reddit and go, hey, I want to start a D&D podcast. Play with people first. Make sure you all get on as a group and then start a podcast. Because if you don't get on with people, or if people don't play the way you expect, it'll fall out. It won't be fun to listen to. You've got to make it fun for the listener to listen to it.
Yeah, you've got to have chemistry as a group. Definitely, which you guys had from the outset, you know.
Yeah, well, it helped with us because we've been podcasting together for about a year beforehand, so we knew each other. We knew how to interact with each other on microphone and over Discord and stuff like that. And I was really good friends with Candy before we brought her in, and she just kind of like slotted into the group like a missing piece. And then it worked.
Oh, awesome! All right. Well, thanks, man. That was a fun chat. So, before we get out of here, is there anything you'd like to plug?
Check out. We don't have a website anymore, but you can check us out on YouTube. youtube.com/@Scorched, or just find us on any podcast app that you happen to use. Do Dragons Dream of Scorched. Currently, we are doing a mid-campaign special of Alien RPG Heart of Darkness, which will be about between 3 and 5 parts. We're recording the second part tomorrow. As of the time of recording this, we've got 1 part out so far, and that's involving two of the guys from Scorched Sheep, and then 3 of our friends from other podcasts or just around the world. It's great fun. Second campaign should kick off probably mid-February, early March. It's going to be a new setting. New characters. It's going to be fun. I'm very excited for it. And they're starting at level 1, so they get to be really squishy.
Oh, yeah. I love level 1. I enjoyed level 1 to 3 the most. I don't know why. I think it's fun.
It's because they're nervous on every encounter. Like you send them in to deal with 4 rats, and they know they might die.
Yeah. I run Sunless Citadel, and they died before they even got to the entrance of the dungeon. Some rats.
That's great.
Yeah. So
I if they happen to die, because they've spent so much time creating these characters, and we actually like Candy's doing artwork for them, I'm sure I'll find a way to like drag them back to town and have them healed at a hospital or something. It'll be one of those. But yeah, so we're doing Alien RPG, then the second campaign. But yeah, we're on YouTube. We're on Blue Sky, scorcheap.bsky.social. I think that's how Blue Sky works. We don't do the Twitters anymore. We don't deal with racists, or Elon Musk, or both. And we also have the Modern Escapism Discord, which you can get from our Modern Escapism Blue Sky account. And just come join us and just chat. And then patreon.com/Modern Escapism. We have the Scorched Sheep tier, which is just the Scorched Sheep stuff, but you get it ad-free, and you get all the music we make and the artwork and the maps that I do. So plenty of extra stuff.
Nice. Yeah, it's a good Discord. Very active and friendly.
Yeah. So yeah, by all means, follow us on there. Or just send us random abuse. Fine, just as long as you interact with us. Come on and say, why has the monk got 12 dexterity? Because we didn't know what we were doing. You will hear beginners two intermediates on this campaign.
Beginner to intermediate campaign. Only
Yeah.
took 60 episodes. Yeah. How does advantage work again?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was a frequent question.
Yeah.
Or
It's a bonus.
where's my bonus actions on D&D Beyond? That was the one from Biggie all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's, we're similar age, me and Biggie, so technology and being on the other side of 50 sometimes aren't great friends. All right, man. Well, thanks. That was a pleasure. Good
It's
catch
been
up.
an absolute pleasure.
All right. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, feed the algorithm monster. And until next time, keep rolling them 20s. Thank you.